Chapter 16, The Sea and the Smoke. Something strange had happened. There had been a trembling in the earth. "And did you see the shadow in front of the tent?" said Amos. "It moved back." There was a tremor in his voice. It moved back. The sun itself moved back. The sun had moved back from west to east. Time itself had moved back. Not far, just a little, but it had moved. It couldn't be, but it was. What did it mean? Was it an omen? What did it foretell? Was it for good or ill? Amos thought he knew. There was awe in his voice, turned to excitement. "Beware, O Assyrians! Yahweh is still in his heavens!" The desert crossing was over. They had come to the walled city of Gaza, but Gaza would not let them in. "You're trouble," they were told by a guard. "You are under the curse of the Almighty." "What Almighty?" The chief was indignant. "We are faithful servants of the Baals. The Baals have never cursed us." "Not Baal," the guard made the sign against evil. "The great king, the king." "What king?" "The king from the north, Sennacherib, the Almighty." The chief spat on the ground. After a moment's stunned silence, the guard cried out in horror. "Get out! Get your cheap stuff out of here! You're not getting us in trouble with the Assyrians!" Cheap stuff? Taharka was as angry as if he himself had been insulted. These were goods from the Nile in the Mukri packs, expensive Egyptian pottery, fine cloths from Cush, jewelry of gold and turquoise mined in the desert. Some of the younger Mukri spearmen wanted to fight, but the chief knew it was no use. Gaza was a big town of the Philistines, well guarded by its militia. The little caravan wouldn't stand a chance. "Something has happened. They never kept us out before. We will move on to Ascalon. It's only a half-day's journey. May the Baals protect us from what we find there." The desert was behind them. They had come to a narrow green strip of coastal land with fig trees and mulberries, olive groves and fields of wheat and barley. The ground was covered with scarlet and blue flowers. Taharka had never seen such a land, and no river, no Father Nile to keep it watered and green. What a wonder! "We are past the time of winter rains," said Amos, "or you would soon see why we have no need of Father Nile." Water from heaven? As in the forests Imbuta had told him of, the forests of his birth. Taharka wished that he could see it. And as they drew closer to the coast, he really could smell salt on the breeze from the west. "The sea?" he said. "When we come to Ascalon," said Amos, "you can see it." But suddenly Taharka felt that he could not wait till they came to Ascalon. A mad kind of impatience rose up within him, and before he knew himself and knew just what he was going to do, he had jumped onto Hermes' back and trotted off from the caravan straight to the west. He was guided by the smell of the salt, and then by a strange sound, like nothing he had ever heard before. The surging of the sea, the soft roll of waters. And suddenly, there it was, water, endless, out to the horizon, blue and glinting sparkles of gold beneath the sun. The end of the world, thought Taharka, filled with awe. Nothing out there. Nothing ever again but water. What ship would venture out beyond that sort of white line of surf? On and on to who knew where or what? And yet he knew that it was not the end of the world. There were ships that ventured out. It led to Talos' land and unimaginable places beyond. Places where white rain fell and savage people kept themselves warm with the skins of beasts. He was dreaming. The water had drawn him into a kind of sleep. He blinked and shook himself awake. He must ride back and meet the caravan. He wished he could stay forever, lulled and enchanted by that vast, monotonous blue and that strange, restless, never-ending sound. What was that in the air? Not the salt, not the sea. This was something new. A strange, heavy smell, faint but foul. Smoke? Had he imagined it, or was it getting heavier? I must get back quickly, he thought. But at least I have seen it. Once in my life I have seen the sea. The caravan never reached Ascalon. The smoke in the air hung heavy now. What lay before them had come to meet them. One moment, the horizon lay before them, clear and green. Next, as in Talos' story, it was black, with men and horses, blotting out the sun. And, for the first time, Taharka saw them, the Assyrians. Chapter 17, Rab Shaka. You are Mugri. A man looked down on them from a high chariot with cruel iron blades on the spokes of its heavy wheels. His face, half covered by a curling black beard, was as hard and cruel as the iron, with narrow, squinting eyes, the corners lined from the sun. His body shirt of shining metal scales gave him the look of some great reptile. He spoke the language of the Babylonians, which Taharka had learned, but his accent was strange, back country, and harsh. The Bedouins whispered among themselves, "Was this the king?" But Taharka, who had been pharaoh, knew otherwise. An important man, no doubt, but not the king. "We are the Mugri," the chief said proudly. He, too, as a trader, understood the languages of the northeast, but he answered defiantly in his own. The Assyrian laughed, a grim, grating laugh. "You may well be the Mugri, the last of your breed. You little army of sand ramblers stirred up by the accursed Egyptians is destroyed, not far from Ascalon. And in case you wonder about the smoke, that is Ascalon itself." The chief did not lower his eyes, but the muscles of his face tightened. His brother had been in that little army of sand ramblers. "Who is this?" The shrewd little eyes of the Assyrian had shifted to the face of the tall, black youth from Cush. Taharka met their scrutiny with all the pride he could muster. He could do no less than the Bedouin chief. "He is not Mugri," said the soldier. "He is called Hawk. He is our physician." "Hawk?" The Assyrian turned to his men with a shout of laughter. Obediently, they all echoed his mirth. "And physician? Shouldn't he still be playing doctor in the children's yard?" "For you, sir," said Taharka softly, "I would prescribe less wine. Your nose is very red." The air was very still. The Assyrian was no longer laughing. He leaned forward from the chariot, his eyes like slits. Taharka didn't flinch, but all his flesh felt cold. The smell of the smoke from Ascalon was stronger now. A second chariot had come up beside the first. Its rider, backed by his driver and two shieldmen, was impatient but respectful. "Time is growing short, my lord the Tartan. We must move out quickly to join the king at Lachish. What about these?" He jerked his hand toward the caravan. "Shall I bring out the executioners?" Taharka, even in that moment, noticed that no one in the caravan cried out, not even the children. The Tartan, he dimly remembered that this was the title of the general of the armies, did not move. At last, he spoke. "No, they can be useful." He looked again at Taharka with a hard, appraising look. "Bring them with us to Lachish. Let them see for themselves. what becomes of those who rebel against us?" The caravan, surrounded by Assyrian horsemen, so they really did use mounted soldiers, was marched eastward across the plain. Before them stretched the long blue line of the mountains of Judah. The sight of them sent a bitter loneliness shooting through Taharka. He had failed, he told himself. He had never reached his refuge in Jerusalem, never found help against his enemies, never even had a chance to fight. Had the world failed too? And the gods? Was there no help against these powers of evil? On high ground at the edge of the hill country stood the walled fortress town of Lachish. Far off they could hear the voices, first a low drone as of bees in the distance, then louder and louder till it had swelled to a roar, and Taharka felt as if his heart had left him, for camped below the walls of Lachish was the main army of the Assyrians. The ground was black with them, swarmed with them. Soon they were surrounded by them, the noise of the camp all around them. Horses and pack animals neighed and brayed, almost drowning the din of their human masters. Taharka looked around him, trying to catch his breath. There were the chariots, the high chariots of the Assyrians, sheathed and spiked with iron, and there they were, what Talos had told him of, the towers on wheels, the mighty armored siege engines of Sennacherib's army, lined up in wall-like rows, the great jagged rams jutting out beyond. Gangs of men were laboring with spades and axes and picks and mallets, throwing up ramps to the wall, the ramps over which those awesome machines would roll. Lachish was circled with the black tents of the Assyrians, tents for the captains, tents for supplies and equipment, and one great tent of many colors rising above them all. All eyes in the caravan were drawn to it. They could not look away. They knew with no question at all whose tent that was, the royal tabernacle of Sennacherib the king. A man had come out of that tabernacle, flanked by 2 spearmen. The soldiers stood back from him as he made his way toward the caravan. "The Rab Shaka!" their guards were shouting. "Show respect!" The Rab Shaka was spokesman and cupbearer to the king. Even the Tartan, coming forth to greet him, showed respect. The 2 men, the rough, sun-darkened Tartan and the pale, mild-mannered Rab Shaka, talked together in low voices. The Rab Shaka seemed surprised by the presence of the caravan. He moved among them, scanning their faces one by one. "Mugri," he said at last, "do you know what has become of your army?" The Bedouins were silent. "You know, but you did not see them die." Silence still. Only one very small boy had begun to cry. "It was wise to bring you here," said the spokesman gravely. "Now you can see for yourselves." He had come to Taharka. He smiled and shook his head. "A Cushite? Yes, we know who is behind this rebellion. Well, they have had a lesson, a harsh one. They won't trouble us for a while." So Shabbataka's army had been defeated. He was beginning to understand why. Talos' stories didn't really do justice to the Assyrians. The Rab Shaka's eyes had narrowed. "But you are not a trader's boy." "They say he is their physician," snorted the Tartan. The Rab Shaka looked at Taharka a long time. Then he turned away. He nodded to the Tartan. Under strict guard, the Bedouins were allowed to build their fires and cook their food. Amos and Taharka ate little, and in silence. They had no heart for conversation. "Will they kill us?" said Taharka at last. "They haven't done it yet. Hold on to that." "Amos? Haru?" A shadow had fallen across the light from the campfire. It was Sabi. He was carrying his mutton and beans. "Can I eat with you?" They made room for him. Sabi, too, was very quiet.
But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Is this our last night?"
"I don't think so," said Amos gently. "I think they want us to see a terrible thing tomorrow and spread the word among the tribes. Don't be afraid, Sabi."
"I'm not afraid."
Then, ashamed but honest, the little boy lowered his head.
"Yes, I am afraid. I'm afraid of that man."
"The tartan?"
"Not the tartan," said Sabi scornfully. "He reminds me of my Uncle Omri. It's the other one, the one with the rings and the earrings. He's the bad one."
"You're a good judge of people, Sabi," said Amos approvingly. "You'll make a wise chief."
"He was looking at Hermes. Haru," said Sabi suddenly. "I think he wants him."
"Hermes?" Taharka was startled. Hermes was the last thing on his mind.
"You know the Nile donkeys are better than the ones from the east," said Sabi reasonably. "They price them almost as high as a good horse." He added bitterly, "I would hate for the Assyrians to have Hermes."
So would Talos, thought Taharka. For that matter, he would hate it himself. "Well, Sabi," he said, "we must see to it that the Assyrians don't get Hermes." For the first time, Sabi smiled.
"Do they have princes in Kush?" he asked.
Taharka laughed. "Kush is crawling with princes."
"I think," said Sabi, "you must be one of them. Only you're not the kind that crawls."
The shadow across the firelight was bigger this time. An Assyrian spearman in his serpent-like mail shirt had arrived, half his face hidden by his short, square beard. "The physician? The one they call Hawk?" Slowly, Taharka rose to his feet. "Come with me. You have been summoned."